Is that the healthy option?
Yeah.
I'm tempted.
Would you like some?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you and welcome to everybody. We've got a couple more people joining later. First of all, I'll ask George to talk about apologies. George?
Good morning. We've got apologies from Martin Longley, Scott Chilton and Rachel Farrell.
Right, and Patricia Miller said she might be late, and Matt Prosser said he would be late. Yeah.
Likewise, Teresa Levy will be late joining us.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anybody else know of any? Okay. Item 2 is the appointment of a vice chairman, and I'm going to ask Sam to make a proposal. Sam?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to nominate Patricia Miller as the Vice or Deputy Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board. This is partly in relation to the change that we've made, which was agreed by full council, recognising the changing role of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the importance of the board working much more closely with the integrated care system, particularly once we've got the integrated care partnership strategy. So I'd like to nominate Patricia.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Seconded.
Thank you, Spencer. And if I can add that although Patricia isn't here, I spoke to her 2 nights ago, and she is happy to be the vice chair if you so decide, or if the voting members so decide. And I will point out that she is vice chair of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Health and Wellbeing Board. And this gives a very useful set of consistency across the piece to make sure that we've got good connections, because we are going to have to work very closely, willingly, with the ICS and the ICB, and having Patricia there as the vice chair of both committees, I think makes sense. But you know, this is a democratic committee. Do we have any other nominations? I hear deathly silence. So as I said this morning in the Joint Public Health Board, I will treat her as being appointed unless any member of this board wishes to indicate that they do not agree. No, in that case, I will say the same as I did this morning. The sky is black with hats being thrown in the air, welcoming Patricia to the vice chairman role. Thank you very much. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Is there anybody who has any interest they wish to declare? There's nobody saying anything. I would remind you that if as we go through the agenda, something crops up and you realise that it is potentially a conflict of interest, you are welcome to butt in and tell us about it as soon as you can. Item 4 is the minutes. We've got a number of meetings from previous incarnations. Are you happy that I sign those minutes as a true record?
Agreed.
Anybody against? Nobody's against. I will treat that as agreed. Public participation. We have no members of the public. Questions from members. We have no questions from members. Urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 8 is the chairman's update. I would just like to make a few points. In some senses, to set the scene. We've got the integrated care system and the integrated care board. By the way, if anybody can't hear, you do need to let me know. And that makes health and wellbeing boards even more important. Jane Kelly is the chair of the BCP Health and Wellbeing Board. She was with me this morning at the Joint Public Health Board. We have met privately and we have committed to work together effectively to make sure that we achieve something and we don't let any turf wars or anything like that get in the way. So I think that's a good start as far as I'm concerned. I remind this board that under the integrated care system, we've agreed place-based management that covers Dorset and BCP council footprints. In the summer, we heard from Sarah Pickup, the LGA Deputy Chief Executive, about the continuing strategy roles of health and wellbeing boards. Many of the people here attended that, and she gave us, I believe, some extremely helpful and insightful advice as to what we should be doing. And she highlighted the new responsibilities for the Health and Wellbeing Board, such as commenting on the forward plan of the Integrated Care Board whether it reflects the priorities identified by the ICP strategy, and whether it reflects a good working relationship with the two health and wellbeing boards. So that's one of our focuses. Following the development session in the summer, both Dorset Health and Wellbeing Board and the BCP Council Health and Wellbeing Board agreed to change their terms of reference in the light of the integrated care system. This change is about making the two health and wellbeing boards role the strategic board for each place to set clear objectives and priorities for a place-based partnership to work on as the ICP strategy is implemented. This recommendation was accepted by Dorset Council last month, and a similar recommendation was adopted by BCP last night. And if I tell you that they managed to fit it in their meeting, which didn't finish till midnight, and they didn't complete the agenda, but they did this bit, I'm particularly pleased. This change gives the boards a clearer role in the integrated care system. It removes, I think, potential duplication with the ICP and means that there should be a clearer, more obvious link between the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy, place-based commissioning, and the ICB. As chair of this particular Health and Wellbeing Board, I want us to focus on decision making as well as meeting our statutory duties. I'm particularly keen that we adopt, if I may say so, a more focused and decision making way of operating. And I'm actually quite keen that we avoid papers that are for discussion only. And I'm just asking that people here, if we have a paper that is for discussion, may I have an agreement that that paper, if it clearly says for discussion only, people read it beforehand, and if they have a question, they submit the question beforehand so that we have some notice, and the author of that paper can actually prepare a coherent and complete response to those questions. What I don't want to do is to get into a debate about papers that are for information only. I'm very happy that we answer questions, but that does require, and I'm sorry if I sound a bit like a school master, that does require you to read them beforehand and decide that you're either happy with them or there are some areas that require clarification. And I'm completely comfortable that that's the way you do it and that we get questions on it. But I'm asking that those questions are submitted beforehand, and I will be quite ruthless in not accepting questions on the day. I hope you understand. So that's the chairman's update. Sean, before I hand over to you, as there was a bit of information there, I just want to check that everybody is comfortable with that. Does anybody have any issues with what I've said? And by the way, silence is assent. Thank you. In that case, I'm really delighted to introduce Sian Walker-McAllister, who is the independent chair of Dorset and BCP Safeguarding Adults Board. She's got a presentation. You members, again, if I can guide you, you should be satisfied that the Strategic Adults Board has carried out its responsibilities. The annual report that Sian has produced is the annual report. You're not going to change it, I don't believe, but you need to satisfy yourself that it answers the exam questions. And it's quite important that you do, because if there's something missing, you need to say, and Sian needs to know. Sian, I hope that hasn't in any way contradicted what you're doing, but may I hand over to you now, Sian? Is that okay? You're on mute, Sian.
That was a good start, wasn't it? Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the introduction. So I did actually present this annual report to scrutiny yesterday as well, and some members and officers were also at scrutiny in here, so apologies for repeating myself. It is, of course, a statutory duty for me to present my annual report, and that is the annual report of both boards. We are two separate boards, even though we meet as one. So it's the Dorset Safeguarding Adult Board, but there is one annual report to join together with BCP, and it's a statutory duty to present it to the Health and Wellbeing Board. So I've got a very short presentation, which I used yesterday for scrutiny, and I use it again for today. and you will have read the report, and happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you. So if you can go to the next page, please, George. Okay, so just an explanatory side. I have presented at last year's Health and Wellbeing Board. So it sets out that in the Safeguarding Adults remit, we have 3 statutory partners, but that Adult Social Care is the lead statutory partner, and in fact the lead for ensuring that a Safeguarding Adults Board is operating appropriately. And then some clarification. The board exists to protect adults with care and support needs. And that with care and support needs is very important, because many of you in your constituencies, in the areas in your work, will come across adults where you have welfare concerns and where there may be concerns, but they might not necessarily have care and support needs. So Safeguarding Adults is about safeguarding those people with care and support needs who, because of those care and support needs, are unable to protect themselves from abuse, neglect and from harm. So all set out in the Care Act, sections 43 to 45. And our boards meet quarterly jointly with BCP to review data, to seek assurance about practice, to work together across Dorset and BCP. Of course, most of our partners are pan Dorset, so it ensures that we're working efficiently with them also. And our prime aim is to improve outcomes for people with care and support needs. One of the things we do quarterly at our meetings is we have what I call a personal safeguarding story. And that's really important, because I think it grounds us back in the place where we need to be, which is, are we making a difference to those people who have experienced a safeguarding intervention? And when we get to the data page, I'll point out where we can record some of that, but where we also at our meetings make sure that we interrogate an intervention to check whether we are doing what we should be doing in terms of asking people for their outcomes, and in particular to look at, are we working together as a partnership? Are we working in a true multi-agency way? The purpose of the board as a strategic partnership is to hold partners to account for ensuring that they work together, so that anybody who can be subject to a safeguarding intervention cannot expect to be given different information by different partners, because we know our citizens, the hospital patients, the GP patients, they may come into contact with the police, and they may come into contact with many of our other partners across the board. So that's our prime aim. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I've just set out here some highlights from our annual report, and remembering, of course, that this report takes us up to the end of March 2022. So it's the report of last year, effectively. So we have delivered against our strategic plan and supporting partner organisations. We have a much beefed up quality assurance and audit group that looks at particular issues from data and decides on data received by the board, that is, and decides on priorities for audit and seeking assurance. And this year, our strategic plan, this last year and continuing into this year, because we only developed it last year, halfway through the year, 2 of our main areas of focus are transitional safeguarding. So transitions, that is, from childhood to adulthood, and homelessness, because those are 2 key areas where both regionally, locally and nationally we need to do some work in terms of improving partners' understanding of appropriate responses to people who might be perceived to be in this cohort. The safeguarding data, which we review and which is rounded up for an annual review on a page, and I must admit to loving a review on a page, is highlighted on page 10. And we can go to that for questions if anyone has any questions. Over this year, I've reviewed the board governance with partners and the subgroup structures to improve our accountability and to focus and work more efficiently with the BCP SAB. So some of our old subgroups have moved off on their way. And in particular, I would like to highlight that we've got really good engagement from a community engagement subgroup now, where we have the opportunity to listen to, in particular, the voluntary and community sector in its widest perspective, but also because it's that sector that works with people with lived experience. And we have an event meeting planned for February this coming year, where we will be able to listen to people's safeguarding experiences and use those to help us improve practice across all partners. We've reviewed our procedures, and we have Pan Dorset safeguarding procedures, and we've reviewed our safeguarding adult review policy. Now, a safeguarding adult review, or SAR, is a statutory review that we're required to undertake to ensure that if somebody has died, and where a number of agencies have been involved, that we have the opportunity to review and learn from that situation. And we've published one safeguarding adult review, SAR Catherine, a pseudonym, which is highlighted on page 12 of this report. We've targeted scrutiny on safeguarding during the pandemic, and had a special meeting last November to look at responses from across health, social care, and the voluntary community sector and the police, to understand our data better and to see did anything come up in the pandemic that we might have had an improved response to had we known what we know now. And certainly that's important, because if we should ever be in the situation again, we'll have the opportunity to put all that learning into practice. We've initiated and now have regular meetings with chairs of the Pan Dorset Safeguarding Children Partnership and the Community Safety Partnerships. In fact, I've just come fresh from one this morning, and there's real traction in that meeting now, where we're looking to have position statements so that we're all working and understanding what we mean when we talk about transitional safeguarding, what protocols we have for sharing information and for ensuring we don't duplicate and we work efficiently to learn and share learning with one another. In fact, today we looked at one of the learning frameworks we use, which is called a 7-minute learning, which is a really good way of ensuring learning from reviews for people who are working on the front line, very, very busy, don't have an awful lot of time to sit and study everything, but can have the opportunity to discuss in their teams or in their breaks or however they learn best from 7-minute learning. And we're going to try and spread that across the CSP and with our partners in children's safeguarding as well, and share them with each other where they are of interest to the other partnerships. We've also set up consultation for outside the main board to improve safeguarding awareness in further and higher education. I had a great meeting last week where we were talking about neurodiversity and issues and problems for students where they've had a formal diagnosis, for example, of autism in their home, their home area, their home borough, and then they've moved into our area for university, and how the university can help and support them. And we're inviting the universities to come to our board meeting to talk about some work they've done in that area in December. So we've also started meeting initially at the behest of one of the housing providers, the social housing providers across Dorset and BCP. And we're going to be delivering a number of events and meetings across with housing providers, supported by Andrew Billany in Dorset and the new head of housing in BCP, to ensure that we improve understanding of safeguarding adults in the housing sector as well. So all in all, a busy year with some targeted work, and where I feel that we really are starting to make a difference. And I'm hopeful that I've delivered on the promises that I made at interview, but more importantly, the promises that we set out within our strategic plan. Thank you very much.
Sean, thank you very much indeed. I just welcome Patricia Miller on board. I noticed she's come on board. And Patricia, that will teach you not to turn up on time. You are now the vice chairman for good reason, and we're delighted because it will give us, as I said to all the members a few minutes ago, it will give us a degree of consistency and coordination across the police. So I'm really, really pleased about that. The recommendation in the report is that members note the report, which informs the board about how the the SAB has carried out its responsibilities to prevent abuse and neglect of adults with care and support needs during 2021-22. And I said earlier, members should comment on the report and should be satisfied that it has carried out its responsibilities to prevent such abuse. So we don't want to discuss it ad nauseam in detail, but we do need to satisfy ourselves, because at the end I'm going to ask any member to indicate if they are in any way dissatisfied that it achieves those objectives. Can I ask members to put their hand up if you've got the hand, and if as in the internet hand, and if that doesn't work, put your screen on and wave at me. And I'm waiting. There's normally yes, Spencer Flower, come on in. Councillor Spencer Flower.
Thanks, Peter. I'm really just helping you move your agenda on. I've got nothing to add. I've read the report and I'm very grateful for the overview we just had from the presenter. I think it's really useful, but I've got nothing further to add really, Peter. I think it's a good example, if we're going to get items to the board for information, that we can read the report and rely on it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. Right at the beginning, I said that we were going to have items for information that I required people to read beforehand. And as I hadn't said it until now, I didn't feel inclined to stop. But you're absolutely right. And I've said, if we get items for information, it must be read beforehand. And if you can't raise points on the day that you haven't let us know beforehand. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Because if they don't, I'm happy to take any more questions. Sean may feel slightly shortchanged, but Sean, take it as an indication of the quality and the completeness of your report. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, any voting is particularly difficult. I'm going to ask, does anybody disagree? And if nobody disagrees, as I agree and Spencer agree, we know that everybody agrees. So nobody disagrees. Does anyone register as abstaining? In that case, excellent, approved. I'd like to move on to the next item. Thank you again, Sean.
Thank you.
The next item is item 10, the Better Care Fund. Sarah Sewell, you've got a couple of slides, and we do have a decision on this item. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf. I'll just share my screen with you. Bear with me. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Sarah Sewell. I'm Head of Commissioning for Older People and Prevention Services in the Adult and Housing Directorate. So I've just got this Better Care Fund item here for your approval today, as the Health and Wellbeing Board are required by the terms of the fund to sign off the plans. I thought a quick reminder might be helpful, just as a refresh on some of the key headlines and the purpose of the fund. So you'll know that the BCF is a key funding stream for all local systems, and in Dorset this financial year it's provided us as a system with a total of £139 million. All of the BCF plans are co-produced, and that includes the ones that you can see in your report pack today. They're co-produced between the Council and Dorset NHS. There is a set mandatory conditions for the investment of the monies, and the BCF policy objectives do really strongly echo our local shared priorities, which are around enabling people to stay well, safe and independent at home for longer, and providing the right care in the right place at the right time. So the plans in your report pack were submitted under delegated authority on the 26th of September, and they are currently subject to the BCF assurance process, obviously pending your approval today. The Funding schemes focus spending around a range of key areas, which include, but by no means are limited to, pathways out of hospital, integrating work between health and social care, carer services, and maintaining independence. And just one example of the maintaining independence category is the integrated community equipment service, which is our pooled budget in the BCF. The narrative plan, which is at the bottom of your report pack, that's a detailed narrative about how we've invested our funding this year, and particularly where we've made changes to commission services this year. And it's quite an exciting opportunity that we've got going forward. So we believe that the plan for this year is that key building block for progression as we move towards a 2-year funding round coming up. So in summary today, the recommendations are that you please approve the BCF submission for this current financial year, and also that you agree to receive an update report from us at your next meeting in March, which will include the opportunities available to potentially reallocate some of the BCF funds from next year that might better support achievement of Dorset's shared goals.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really helpful. I'm just going to check with Vivian or Jonathan whether you wish to add anything to that. Councillor Andrew Parry, come on in.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ensure that when we see this paper coming back to us in March, that we do see that the distinction, I should say, between investment in children and young people and, of course, adults in respect of health and social care. So we've got a very clear understanding how that's that bigger pot is to be utilised between the two directorates and beyond.
Andrew, you've got a bit of...
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So just to repeat that, it's really about the distinction of the funding elements of it and how those will be broken down to reflect investment in children and young people and of course adults, because I appreciate we're talking about a very large sum of money in total here, but we do want to be able to articulate that in a way that would show the investment elements that go into children and young people and the investment elements that go into adults and obviously our respected partner organisations.
Thank you, Andrew. Who would be the best person to answer that? Sarah,
Yeah,
do you want to?
So we will of course include those areas, Councillor Parry. You'll see that there is some detail in the report that just kind of gives an indication as to how we intend to group the sort of the spending within the BCF going forward. So we're about to embark on a period of analysis, and we'll be working closely with officers in children's services and finance about how that planning would look and what any lead-in times would be, because of course at the moment the BCF funds are committed, so it's about our plan as to how we move to a different position, or indeed if we're looking to include additional funding streams and reporting into the BCF, so kind of how we report it. So in terms of managing expectation, it's how we plan that out longer term, as opposed to having big areas of funding going forwards. But we'll be working closely with counterparts in children's services as we work that through.
Yeah, I think the importance of it is the transparency of that, because obviously we have a public accountability, and I know there's often comments in broader media about how funds are allocated and used, and I think we need to understand that both inside the Dorset Council area and of course anything that relates to the BCP Council area and associated organisations. So hopefully that could be a really straightforward. I think Teresa wants to come in on this point.
Yeah, thank you. So I can't find my hand on the electronic button, but there we go, it's in the room. Yeah, so really just noticing as well, we haven't got anybody from Children's Services in that assurance group, but very happy to nominate somebody for that, to make sure that we're kind of in that balanced place, particularly around young people, and the joint birth to settled adulthood programme that we're running is a clear place for us to be thinking about that. So,
okay, Sarah, so you've got the message about transparency, and I think that's absolutely essential, so that any audit and any understanding of it is very clear. Sarah, can I ask you a question about the update report? Because you'll be looking to potentially reallocate funds. What I want to avoid is an update report coming, the statutory 10 days beforehand, and if at all possible, I'd like the update report to be in sufficient time for there to be the potential for people to communicate backwards and forwards over the internet, so that we have a bit of an informed decision when we come to March, rather than people not unreasonably asking questions, which might then lead to further questions or to further considerations. Is that possible, please?
Yeah, I can work with John and Vivian and as to how we bring that and make sure that the right parties have got enough sight and opportunity to input beforehand.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Sam.
Just a small question from me. I thought the narrative was really helpful, actually, Sarah. So it was a really useful report to kind of give a bit more context around the whole of the BCF. One of the questions I did have was there's a bit of a comment about the metrics being in development, particularly things like performance around reablement. Is it something that we're working on, and will we be able to see that performance and measure it relatively easily in the update report?
We should be able to. So the reablement targets are ones that we regularly report on. So we should be able to show that. And you'll see in the narrative there's some detail in there about the kind of the changes that we've made with our reablement contracts and the direction of travel that we expect to see on that. So yes, you'll see that.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else wish to ask any questions on this? I'm waiting just because sometimes hands can take a while to come up. Patricia, sorry, and then Simon. Patricia.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the paper, Sarah.
Can you speak up a bit, Patricia? You're very faint.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's still not brilliant, but it's okay.
It links to Sam's point around how we're going to measure success, and I just want to ask if we can make sure that what we agree in terms of the measures that will demonstrate success to Health and Wellbeing Board, that we're focusing on outcomes and not transactions, and also that we're really clear what we're getting is better outcomes at scale, because what we've had quite often before is single or a small number of stories about the outcomes for individuals, that when you really get underneath that information, we're not achieving that at scale for parts of the population.
Patricia, thank you very much. That's really helpful. Yes, all our plans need to be smart, and they need to be focused on outcomes and not narrative and various bits about process or transactions. So that's why it's helpful to see it beforehand, because it may well be that I start to say, okay, so what difference does it make? What does good look like? What can we expect to see? What's the results, etc. Okay, Simon.
Yeah, my question really relates to what Sam and Patricia have already touched on, which is key metrics and measuring outcomes. So when I looked at some of the detail, and if I looked at percentage of people who were discharged back to their normal place of residence, the metric there seems to strike initially at a low point and then suddenly jump up to a high point. And it does say in the detail, I do appreciate that this is being looked at and it will be, the aim is to do much better. But can the board have kind of assurance that we wouldn't get a nasty surprise in Q4 of the plan where it jumps from, say, 90.8 to 92? I'm more interested in the principle to make sure there aren't surprises in that where we've got a J curve at the end of it on the metrics.
Yeah, I'm now remembering studying the J curve. Yeah. So Sarah, that I think it's a really important point. There's a sort of no surprises bit in this. So we need to have an understanding not only of the metrics, but the direction of travel and the speed of the direction of travel, so that we don't get somewhere lastminute.com and we haven't realized what's happening. So I think that's my summary of what you said, Simon. I think I've got it. And you know, we will know if we see it, if it hasn't happened.
Yeah, and many of the metrics are reported through other means as well. So I think part of the work that we need to do around the opportunities for the future is to understand where we're already reporting elements around what is BCF funded. So we just make sure we pull that together and we're being clear. But there's nothing to say we couldn't provide reports at a more regular basis, because a lot of them are fundamental streams to what we're reporting on regularly. So we can consider how we could do that, and perhaps have that as an area for recommendation when we come back, or we could touch on that area perhaps.
Okay, no, but I think if we treat this as an aspiration and an aim, and when you present your stuff, forgive us, but we're going to comment on how much it meets that aspiration.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
You know, this is meant to be like it is in business. Is it what we wanted? Is it clear? Does it tell us what we're doing? Does it make a difference? Okay. Any other questions? Sarah, if there are no other questions, I'm going to look for hands. Can you stick the recommendations back up on the screen?
Yeah, of course.
Just so that people are completely clear what I'm asking them to agree to. For the avoidance of that, so that's fine. So does anybody have any final questions before I ask you if you're all in approval of this? I'm being told I need a proposer and seconder. Can I, Sam proposing?
Propose.
Good man. Can I have a seconder, please, Spencer?
Yeah, I'll second, Peter.
Thank you. Anybody against? You need to unmute and tell me now. Anybody abstaining? You need to unmute and tell me now. I am going to assume, therefore, that we are all approving this. Okay, I'm going to move on. The next item is physical activity and strategy. And my attempt at humour earlier was when Rupert wasn't here as early as I thought he might be, and I thought I might have to run around and do the physical activity strategy. Right, Rupert, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the last minute appearance. I've got a couple of slides that we're going to share, if that's okay. Does that come through okay, Chair?
Yeah, it's
just going full screen.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Sorry,
Brilliant.
Rupert. Catherine, I've just seen a note saying you've started the meeting again. I don't know what that means. Go for it, Rupert.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. And hello, everyone. I'm Rupert Lloyd from Public Health Dorset, and I'm here today with Charlie Coward, who is Deputy Chief Exec at Active Dorset. We've just got a handful of slides that really pick out the key points from the report and the strategy, which you've all seen to run through. And then I'll finish by highlighting our recommendations or requests of you today. So, a movement for movement, the draft physical activity strategy for Dorset is our shared approach for enabling all of us to move more across Dorset and BCP. And as members will remember from previous presentations and sessions we've done with you, it builds on what we already do well across Dorset, but also recognises that there are opportunities to do more. Our key kind of challenges or areas for action for addressing some of the barriers that cause some people in our population to find moving more difficult than others. And then it also sets out those key themes for making change we can all apply to our own decision making. We are not going to run through the kind of content or the detail of the strategy in a great amount of depth as it's in the report, but we thought we would just revisit and highlight those 3 areas for making change. So we need to reframe the language we use when we talk about physical activity. We need to build movement into everyday life for more of us, and we need to connect everyone with the value of daily movement, connecting our population with what motivates them for moving more. And I think cutting across all of those 3 themes, which hopefully comes across in the report and the strategy, is that across our system, in order to take a whole systems approach to moving more, there are things that we can do as individuals, as organisations or teams, but also as a system and an integrated care system. So finally, the recommendations or our request of the board today are threefold. We'd ask that you note the contents of the report and the draft strategy. We ask that within your organisations, partners lend their support as we launch the Movement for Movement, and also engage importantly with the approach it sets out and those 3 themes or areas of action that I've highlighted. And then finally, an additional request, which isn't in the report, but hopefully you're happy for me to highlight it here, Chair, is can we review as a board the progress we've all made in 12 months' time in terms of delivering against the strategy? And I will stop sharing now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Rupert. You have asked me, and I've agreed to write a little forward for you, which you've written. So I'm grateful. Can I ask you just to talk for a couple of minutes as to how the various partnerships here, from the Fire Authority, councils, ICB, how they can, what tangible things you're looking for them to do to help you in terms of kicking this off and energising it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll kick off on that, and then perhaps I could invite Charlie to add to that. I think in the short term, as a most fundamental starting point, what we'd be really keen to see is leaders from across those organisations publicise the strategy within their organisation and help us connect with their comms teams and their workforce teams to bring it to life. And if we've got volunteers from within the board who can work with us to develop some insights or some examples of how movement matters to them, how they value it, and how they build it into their working daily life, that would be an excellent tool for us to start translating the strategy into what it could mean, or what it does mean for individual partners. Don't know if you want to add anything to that, Charlie.
Yeah, I would just add that I think we would ask of all of our system partners, in thinking about the decisions they make in how they design their services, run their organisations, and how they embed physical activity as part of that. So the decisions they make, how does that impact on activity levels in the way that we design housing, roads, how we deliver services in healthcare? How do we prioritise physical activity messaging that's going to resonate with large proportions of our population? And it won't have escaped your notice that the strategy does talk about movement as well as physical activity, and we do encompass sport within that, but we're recognising that actually it is much more about movement for a lot of our residents, and that is something that seems more achievable for people to think about how they move, how they travel about day to day, how they can build movement into their everyday activity.
Okay, I'm going to ask John Selgren to come in, but just before I do you mind if I put an action on everybody in this meeting to think about how they can contribute towards making this happen? And having thought about that, can they let George Demographic Services know what they're doing? So we've got some sort of repository of what we're doing, so that everybody, I think it's important we don't just walk away and say that's a good idea. The other thing, Charlotte, I appreciate it's a brochure. Can you get copies of the brochure to various partners? Because, one thing we can do is we can have it in the reception, and I'm sure Patricia can and other people. And I think, sometimes those sort of things can actually have quite a positive effect. So an action on everybody, should they choose to do so, that they must think about how they're going to help make this happen and make this a reality. So I'll do that, and I'll let George know. And if you can let George know, so that we put some responsibility and a little bit of pressure on everybody. John Selgren, come in with your good ideas.
Thank you, Peter. That's very kind, and welcome, boy. John Selgren, Executive Director for Place for Dorset Council. So I certainly really welcome the strategy, Chairman. I think it's excellent. It really frames exactly what we need to be doing, and I do like the fact it's couched in that very easy and accessible way about let's get some movement. So thank you. That's really helpful. To get into the practicals, and then Chairman Peter, I'll come back to your point. So very helpfully, we had Rachel with our Place leadership team. Was it last week, Rachel? Week before? It's very recent anyway. Really talking about how we can continue to take forward some of this work in practical terms. So my suggestion would be is really welcome the strategy. I think it absolutely captures it. But for me, and Chairman, to answer your question, I think the next step is we need to think about an action plan. I don't think that needs to be massively detailed. It doesn't need to be laborious. But I think what that would helpfully do is just to crystallise those things that we actually are currently doing, want to do, or want to accelerate, that would actually make sure that we track the action. I think, in fairness, if I may, through you, Chairman, but to Rachel, so I think the conversation that we began the other week, we could do that quite quickly. So certainly some of the things that were referenced that fall within the Bailiwick of the Place Directorate, we would be very pleased in areas like leisure and green space and so on, to actually identify those things that we are doing or could do to actually aid the delivery of this strategy. And Peter, I know you'll like this from your business background, but we could actually put some, I think, some quite smart targets around that about what we're going to do, how and by when. So I'll say that would be my suggestion, if that perhaps found some wider support in the board, because it might be fine for me to say, well, we'll do that in place, but I think it would be a much richer action plan if it had that effectively all partner input to it. I hope that's a helpful contribution.
Yeah, very helpful, John. I'm very, very personally happy to support that. Patricia, I suspect is going to come in and tell us how she's going to help that. Rupert, can I just check with you first? Are you, in principle, happy to produce an action plan?
Yep, in principle, Chair, and I think Charlie and I would be happy to link with John and others to see how we can help bring those themes to life in terms of, I think the phrase was an action plan, which is about what we're doing, what we want to do more of, and what we want to accelerate. So yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm really grateful because I appreciate we've caught you on the hop a bit, but I think it's a good idea. It's in principle, and we leave you to do the detail. We're certainly not going to start boiling the ocean here. Patricia.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective, if I'm honest, because I think we're going to get lots of these different strategies, and we're in danger of responding to each one of them rather than thinking about them as pieces of work that are interdependent and connected with the wellbeing conversations at place and neighbourhood. So what I was going to suggest was, rather than producing a plan that's only for physical activity, the integrated care partnership strategy will get signed off by the integrated care partnership early December. Then we'll have to put an implementation plan together. And actually, when we start to think about what that means at place, the physical activity work should be an integral part of that plan. Yes, we need to be able to identify each of the elements separately if needed, but actually there will be an integral part of that plan.
Okay, I don't think that just makes it all fit within the whole scheme of things. So I think that makes sense. Andrew Parry.
Thank you. I think one of the key things that we need to bring into this conversation when we're talking about physical activity in place-based areas is, of course, our town and parish councils who have control of many of the leisure facilities and play facilities that we particularly want to encourage children and young people to access. And also returning to our school community and seeing whether things like the Daily Mile or activities in school are being maximised and the opportunities there. I know I see a lot of good practice in schools, but we obviously want to ensure that it's embedded in all schools across the county and across the community as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I mean, I think we're all keen to make sure that this doesn't get tied up in any issues that delay it, but that it does fit with everything else. So if come December we've got some guidance that can then feed down so that we can have a plan, I think, Patricia, that makes sense. Does anybody have any other comments they want to make?
Chair?
Yes, sorry.
Just to develop the discussion, which I think has been really helpful. It is a system strategy. It was always intended to be a system strategy. And board members may or may not be acquainted with the history of this work. So before the integrated care system and before the integrated care partnership, we did have a prevention scale programme. And I think I'm probably not over-egging it to say Dorset was one of the areas that the national evaluators were interested in, because we'd made quite big strides in system working around physical activity. It's one of those issues that everyone would agree with. It's a good thing to do, but it's quite difficult to get traction sometimes when we're bringing together organisations in our system. And I was very struck with the diagram that's on page 68, is it? 66, sorry, in the strategy. It's just a simple table that shows you the impact of regular physical activity on reducing your risk of a whole range of conditions. So to support what Patricia's saying, the integrated care partnership strategy will have physical activity in it as a priority. I think what would be really useful is if we could agree where some of the evidence is collected and held, because we do have to kind of measure and monitor impact. And obviously that will be different for different organisations. In place services, it might be around accessibility, it might be about rights of way improvements. There's all sorts of infrastructure issues which councils will be interested in monitoring. For health services colleagues, we're much more interested in the connection between some of the behaviour change support. So I think a little bit of thinking about how we construct a way of collecting measurable impacts would be really, really helpful. And I suggest that perhaps building on the initial request to Rupert and Charlie to think about collecting ideas for action from organisations, could we extend that just to perhaps develop a bit of a table that also starts to think about some of the measures so that we can at least start to collect the impact, because it will be different in different organisations, but it would be good if we could agree to at least hold the ring on that. Yeah. And I think the place to do that would be through the two health and wellbeing boards.
Okay, I think, Patricia, thank you for your suggestion. So there will be an element of coordination from the ICS, and then it will drill down to the individual health and wellbeing boards. But that doesn't stop individual members here taking a role in helping Rupert and Charlotte drive the launch of this. Sorry, long COVID. Are there any other points people wish to make? If there aren't, I'm going to ask Rupert. Just my machine's decided to hang up. Can you stick the recommendations back on the screen, please, Rupert?
Yep. Bear with me for a moment, Chair.
Oh, I found it.
Does that come through okay?
Yes. So there is a slight change, but I don't think that's critical. So note the content of the report, lend your support, review progress in 12 months' time. I don't know if Patricia wants to add a further one in terms of the ICS meeting and including it or something like that, or whether we'll take it as read. Patricia, do you have any thoughts as to whether you'd like to add an action on that?
Yes, please, Peter. Just that if we just say that it needs to be embedded in the place-based partnership plans.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Okay. Can I have a proposer for that, please?
I'll propose it.
Patricia, I nearly said your name there, so you obviously read my mind. I think that's really helpful. And as chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, I'm going to second it. So I think that's got a little bit of democratic authority, etc. Does anybody have any? So I'm going to ask, does anybody have any comments? I'm going to ask, is anybody against it? You need to raise your hand now. Is there anybody abstaining? I am therefore going to take that as everybody approves. Okay? Thank you very much indeed. The next item 12, is the pharmaceutical needs assessment, which is a verbal update. And Sam, you're giving that?
I'm going to give a quick update.
It says Jane Horn. Sam's going to give a quick update, which is required legally.
Thank you very much. So Jane Horn was due to give an update, but Jane's very kindly covering the GP Summit for me, which Patricia is also at today. So the item is really about coming back to the Health and Wellbeing Board to give an update on where we got to with pharmaceutical needs assessment. You may remember the board gave delegated authority for the sign-off on the delivery of the pharmaceutical needs assessment to the DPH and the chair of the board. That was in September 2021. The board also agreed that we do a joint pharmaceutical needs assessment, which is really helpful. So the PNA covers the Dorset Council area and the BCP Council area. And for those of you who don't know what a pharmaceutical needs assessment is, it is literally a statement of need for pharmaceutical services. So that means this is the main document which governs entry to the market. So any provider wishing to develop pharmacy services has to use the PNA to agree with NHS England, who commission pharmacy services at the moment, whether there's a gap. And if there is that gap, that's the document that they would then use to develop their service in consultation with the sorts of gaps that we've identified. So it's one of those duties that falls to the Health and Wellbeing Board. It may not be well understood, but it is an important consultation and engagement exercise. And it's our way of assessing whether we're satisfied with the current state of pharmacy services and whether there are any important gaps that we need to pick up. So I'll move on to talk about the engagement. The public engagement took place between February and March, and I think in Jane's notes she says there were over 100 responses. There is a comma after the one, so I'm hoping it's 100 and not 1,000, but I'll go back and check for the board. I'd be surprised if there were 1,000 responses. But what we were really asking about was how people use their current community pharmacies and what influence their choice of community pharmacy, because they do provide different services, including enhanced services. The draft report found that there were no current or future gaps identified, and then we moved into a formal consultation. So the formal consultation took place between 21st of July and the 21st of September. And we have 32 formal responses. That was a big improvement on the 2018 consultation where we had 8 responses. So I think the quality of the engagement was better. And some of the themes that came forward from those responses included why we've used the particular primary care network boundaries and being clear that in some places they can be quite complex. So it's not easy to display them visually on a map. And we got a number of comments made in relation to that. There were concerns raised about access to pharmacy services in rural areas. People asked how and when the pharmaceutical needs assessment would be updated. They wanted to know how pharmacy opening times were taken into account in the analysis. And they also wanted more information on extended roles for pharmacists. So you'll be aware that under contract extensions, sometimes pharmacies are asked to provide additional services to support winter resilience, for example. There's contracts around at the moment for blood pressure measurement in the community. So some more information on those roles was requested. And then some comments about housing development and population growth. And is that taken into account when we're looking at planning for pharmaceutical needs? And then some comments made on the potential for efficiencies or improvements in how medications were managed across the system. In terms of the conclusions, after taking those comments into consideration, we looked at the provision of pharmacy services across a number of areas, particularly in rural Dorset. The consideration about the provision of pharmacy services in Shaftesbury and Gillingham was unchanged after considering the questions that have been raised. Portland, unchanged. In Poundbury, we made a slight change to the pharmaceutical needs assessment report, recognising that there are some things that could be done to improve access, particularly to extended services in the future. And in Verwood, the questions that were raised resulted in an unchanged assessment. And then James included 2 further points, which are further conclusions that we've added as a result of the consultation. There's the issue of community pharmacy remaining a high priority for the system in future. And it might be useful to hear from Patricia about the developing plans, because I believe the Integrated Care Board is going to take on commissioning for community pharmacy. And then there was also a recommendation made that we carry out a local campaign over the next 3 years to encourage the public to be less wasteful about ordering medicines. So only ordering the medicines that you need, avoiding over ordering, because there's a big waste issue, which is a national issue. That's been going on for some time, but there's a clear role for our comms teams in supporting that. So I'm really pleased to say that the work has been completed. The reports are available. I'm more than happy to provide those for information to the board. That'd be useful.
If you could, so that could be great. Patricia, did you want to pick up on Sam's lead into yourself?
Only to give a brief update. It'd be really helpful actually, Sam, if David hasn't already got it, if you could let David Freeman have some of that intelligence because he's leading on the delegation. So yeah, from the 1st of April, we are due to take on a number of delegations, optometry, dentistry and pharmaceuticals. Where we are at the moment is we have been approved in terms of the regulation around delegation that's set by NHS England, and we've held 2 of a series of workshops with those 3 different sectors and the professionals within them to talk about how they would want the relationship to work going forward from the 1st of April. And I think they've been pretty successful so far. So there's nothing to update in terms of detail. I wouldn't expect any major change to service provision right at the beginning, but we have acknowledged that for some of those individuals, they've felt very strongly that the relationship with NHS England has not worked. And so we need to work on a different kind of relationship going forward so they feel supported to manage the demand that they're facing.
Thank you, Patricia. Sam, is apart from being aware, what is it we need to do? Do we need to say thank you? Do we need to vote on it? Do we need to change it?
I think it would be nice to acknowledge the work that Jane's done because it's one of those tasks that almost no one wants in the public health team. I'll be honest. It's a labour of love to collect this information and to run the consultation. I think it's really encouraging to have the commissioning responsibility closer. So again, I think the more that we can do to engage and listen to local concerns about pharmacy services and perhaps have a bit more of a responsive commissioning relationship with our pharmacies, that's a real strength. So although we look at this as a once off every 3 years, actually it should be, quite a live assessment. And I've been more than happy to make sure that David's connected up with those 2 reports as well.
Okay, and if everybody's happy, I will put something in the minutes to say thank you to Jane for doing this fairly onerous and not particularly rewarding task. Councillor Jane Somper.
Thank you, Peter. A quick one. As people have responded, will the report be published publicly? And if so, where? The findings of your report.
Yeah,
it's a good question. I'll double check as to whether it's already been published because I don't know the exact answer to that. It's on our Public Health Dorset website as I speak. That's
okay.
So
brilliant. I will direct people there.
So can you highlight that in a minute? Thank you, Jane. Teresa Levy.
Thank you. Yeah, really welcome the report, and I appreciate some of it, might feel thankless because it's the issue of making it sharper and more effective and more welcome commissioning frameworks. But I was just thinking about the opportunity going forward then to have the interface with the pharmacist being a more meaningful interface too, beyond just collecting your drugs. So I think there is something about the opportunity this gives us is not to be sniffed at either.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? No, in that case, we've said thank you to Jane. We are genuinely grateful and we note your verbal report. However, Matt, you've managed to join us very nearly at the end. The next item is the forward plan. I've asked George, my colleague from Democratic Services, to put this as the first substantive item rather than the last in all future reports. And my reason for doing that is that as you go through the agenda, if you know what's coming up, sometimes it can actually alter the way you ask questions because you know something is coming up later in the forward plan. So I'm going to take it later. We know that we're going to add the physical activity strategy to be reviewed in a year's time. Have you got a forward plan that you can throw up on the screen? Have we got anything? George, you've just fighting with his machine. If you can't get up, I'll talk it through. Okay, so we might as well move past the ones we've already covered. Stop there, great. So can I ask everybody to ensure that they contact George, preferably discussing with me as to what they would like to be added. We've got the pharmaceutical needs assessment again in a year's time to review it. We've talked about the physical strategy. We've got the ICB forward plan. I'm just going to check with Patricia if that's a sensible date or whether we need to have some update earlier on that. Patricia?
Well, let me think about the deadline. So we've got to produce, we've got to submit the ICP strategy on the 19th of December. Then we've got to produce the 5-year health only multi-health organisation plan by the end of March. But I would expect that during that period as well, we would be reviewing the joint health and wellbeing strategy in line with the ICP plan, and we'll try to produce something that is more place-based. So I'm just thinking, Sam, about what the time frame for that might be to then bring that back to the Health and Wellbeing Board for approval.
Well, that's really helpful, Patricia. I mean, I'm not trying to tie you down to this, but that looks to me like both those items are provisionally okay.
Yeah.
And you can come back with some, go on, Sam, sorry.
Well, thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a sort of general comment, really, going back to the Chairman's introduction where we talked about the changing role of the board in relation to the integrated care system. What I'd really like to do is to see if we could get more visibility around the forward plan and more input, both from the sort of place-based partnership leads into what we think should be on the Health and Wellbeing Board forward plan, but also to recognise the additional responsibilities under the legislation. So Patricia, right, the Health and Wellbeing Board will have to also take a look at the ICP strategy. We will have to refresh the joint health and wellbeing strategy to make it more specific, because now that we've made this change, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be sort of guiding the priorities for place-based partnership working. And obviously that works at an early stage, but it does need some guide rails. There's also the requirement to make an independent comment on the ICB forward plan, which is in the legislation, as well as I think Care Quality Commission will be asking Health and Wellbeing Boards as well for an independent assessment of how well the integrated care system is working with the Health and Wellbeing Board. So there's a bit more of a work programme that's starting to develop under the board rather than topics.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, and Patricia, you and I agreed we need to get together to map out, and I think this is a useful discussion. But I think what I'm trying to say is we've got the bones of some of the future items in there. In terms of the birth to settled adulthood, we were thinking of having a verbal update on the balanced scorecard. Jane Somper is acting as the lead on birth to settled adulthood, which obviously straddles the two directorates. Jane, this may have caught you by surprise. Do you think you'd be in a position to give a verbal update on the balanced scorecard for that in March of next year?
Thank you, Peter. Let's say yes.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. These are only provisional, and George, can you
I understand
provisional
that.
against each, because I don't like to catch anybody out. But Patricia and I, as chair and vice chair, will get together and we'll talk to Sam to try and flesh this out a little bit more. But this looks like it's a decent starting point, yeah? Does anybody else have any other comments on the forward plan? No? I'm going to move to the next item then, which is the date and time of the next meeting, which is the 15th of March 2023. Next year. Is next year going to be 2023? at 2 p.m. It's scary, isn't it? I remember being in charge of the Year 2K project. So date of next meeting told. Exempt business, we have no exempt business. I am there, and we don't do any other business. I am therefore closing the meeting, and thank you very much.